Welcome to the It's Your Business show, and it is brought to you by the Bold Business Podcast. I am so excited to be here today as your host, and I'm Jess Dewell, and also with me are two amazing people. Christy, introduce yourself.
Hey, Christy Maxfield with Purpose First Advisors. We do strategic growth planning and exit planning to help business owners get the most out of their business.
And Quentin, introduce yourself.
Quentin Ortega with QCO Consulting, focused on growth strategy planning and exit consulting for mid-sized businesses as well. So.
Mm-hmm. And y'all know that's all I talk about is business. So I'm so super excited to have two other consultants with me that were interested in growth and longevity and sustainability and having fun while we thrive and grow and achieve our goals. That's what that's all about. All right. So in this program today, we're talking about time. We're talking about time as a catalyst. And here is the thing. The thing is, why now? What makes today of all days or this quarter or this whatever of time the important time? Because it's always a good thing to talk about time. We don't talk about it enough. And as we were preparing for the show, it became clear. It became clear that all of us have experienced, not only personally through our work and the companies that we are working with, that there is some expectation of the way that we use time is value. And there is truth in that. And at the same point in time, it's not always true. So, you know what? Who knows what we're going to be talking about today? We actually do, don't get me wrong. But who knows where each of these topics will go? Because time is fickle, time is fun, it's constant, and here we go. All right, so I know we decided we were going to start in this area. And Christy, I think that this was yours. Please tell me if I've got my notes wrong about the stories we tell ourselves around time.
Absolutely. So when we were preparing for this, one of the things we noted amongst ourselves is that most times we're going to tell our clients that resources aren't necessarily finite. They may feel finite, but they're not. You know, money, actually, there's not a limited amount of money on the planet. It gets made and changed and expanded every single day. So money is actually not a finite resource. It may feel finite to you, but technically speaking, there is no end to it. There is no limited pie from which to take your slice from. Time, on the other hand, is for the mere fact that we are mortal. So for us as humans, as souls experiencing the human condition, we do have a finite period of time. And we need to recognize that how we think about time, how we understand time, our feelings about mortality, our feelings about choice and how that plays into how we feel about time is one of the many stories we tell ourselves as humans. It's also one of the many stories we tell ourselves that impacts our work. So how we feel about money often influences how we behave as business owners, and how we feel about time acts in that same way. So really thinking about, what do you think about time? And the three of us, and probably pretty much anybody we might stop on the street, although there's probably generational differences that I'm not aware of, but that they feel like it's scarce. I need to use it wisely. There is a wise and an unwise way to use time. And that the amount of time I spend on something is indicative of either my productivity or my worth, because that's capitalism. And whether we like capitalism or don't like capitalism, it is the paradigm in which entrepreneurs, at least in the United States, are looking at the business enterprise that they're building. How much time do I have to grow it? How much time do I have to pay these bills? How much time do I have to spend on taking care of the everyday things? How much time do I have to spend with my family? And then if you've got feelings about time and personal worth and whether or not you're being a good, productive human being, which all have nothing to do with one another, but we've put them all in the same category and we've made them relational. You're going to have a feeling. You're going to have a feeling about, like, if I take a break, is that break actually going to help make me more creative and help me make better choices and prioritize and focus and get the most out of the time I do spend on something? Or am I going to spend most of that time beating myself up for not working?
Ugh.
So that's what I would think. Like, when I thought about the stories we tell ourselves, like,
well, so I'm trying to think of a story I tell myself. right? I think I try and tell myself a story, and I wonder if this is from like an act to plan perspective, because I've got to take action to see what's actually going on in this present moment to decide what to do next when we're talking about short-term use. And I actually realized that if I have 15 minutes, unless I am understanding what I want to do with those 15 minutes, it's ends up being what I would consider wasted time. So I decided I would switch that around. I was okay, fine. So it takes a little time to get started. By the time you get started, you have to stop. That's no good. But is it really wasted time? Why, yes. So I was wasting a lot of time. And then I'd spend time on all of these ways to use time. And how do you break all this down? And then I'd get frustrated because I'd have a to-do list bigger than I could ever accomplish, even though I was making some progress. So you know what I decided to do just this week because of this conversation? If I have 15 minutes or less, why don't I spend 5 minutes emptying my mind or getting everything out randomly, however I'm going to do that? And then can I sit in stillness for 5 minutes? And then I have another 5 minutes to continue to sit in stillness if I'm liking it. And if not, I can get ready for the next thing so I can actually be ready when that energy is needed at that time. So I was taking a totally different tact of how can I use the time that we have every day and the thing that feels wasted, there's the story, and make it useful. And in fact, a lot of people might still go, oh, that's wasted time. Not really. I'll take any moment in time to sit and become still, because the world opens up in a whole new way when that happens.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think that everybody, like Christy was saying, right, we have this weird relationship where because of our upbringing, because of our culture, we view that as negative, as like, well, you could have sent an email during that time. But in reality, like taking those kind of, let's say, like micro self-care breaks throughout the day, if you get the chance to, is really going to arm you to be better prepared, better like centered for having the rest of your day, for responding to the rest of the tasks that are ahead. And I think that it talks to kind of the switching cost, right? You mentioned like getting ramped up for the next thing. I know that for me, I've used a bunch of different techniques over the years for managing my time and how I interact with it to feel productive. But I think that the biggest one of those that I've learned is like trying to do that kind of batching technique of like getting away from or trying to limit or understand or control those switching costs. Because if I'm jumping from, an in-person meeting to a call, to an in-person meeting to a call, to driving to, all these things throughout the day, I get a lot less done, right, in general. So I see that as both actual productivity, but also in my mind, kind of my personal value of that productivity.
There's I was talking to somebody the other day and he said, I've got a 20-minute commute and it's just long enough to listen to a little bit of the radio and to have a transition between point A and point B. And in a world where most of us have either reduced or removed commute, we've taken out what was an acceptable, permissible place to not be doing as much. Now, granted, hopefully you're driving and you're aware, because not everybody is. Sometimes I think people forget what the purpose of sitting behind the wheel is, actually. But I also remember, like early on in my career, when I would travel for business, all of my colleagues, they would immediately take out their laptop and it was like 2 extra hours of work. And I was like, man, I would really like to take a nap. But I feel peer pressure to take out my laptop and work because, oh, this is productive. We should be making the most of this time. I was like, I don't know, like, can't we just take advantage of the fact that up until recently you couldn't? You just didn't have Wi-Fi and stuff. And can't we just pretend like we don't? Like,
right?
Yeah.
It's the productivity time equation, and also makes it really hard for us as owners, where time is the commodity we pour so much of into our businesses, to really wrap our brains around outcome-based evaluation of our team.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I have to spend 10 hours in the business because I've got to do an action. Like, I'm an employee and an owner and an investor. And I'm probably playing the role of 2 or 3 employees. And so my day is very long and does all of these things. And now I'm bringing in specialists if I'm smart, because finding unicorns is really darn hard. But I'm bringing in specialists and they get to focus in one area for most of their day. And if they're producing the outcomes I want, it really doesn't matter whether they do that from home or from the office. It doesn't really matter if it takes them 8 hours or 10 hours. Okay, how do I deal? Like,
Well, I think we've inadvertently ended up with what? This expectation that we're supposed to be able to control more than we can control.
Oh, well, there's that.
I mean, I'm listening to all of this
Deep.
and I'm thinking, well, boy, aren't we wound a little tight. Boy, are we giving ourselves a lot of credit to
Okay, now I feel seen.
to influence some of this. I'm like,
I feel like for people that are watching, I have to call out the feel seen, because I've been thinking about that all week. We had our prep call. For this conversation earlier this week, and Christy said, "I feel seen," and I feel like both Jess and I were like, "Oh yeah, this does feel." Felt like we were attacking ourselves a little bit here with this conversation, just because we, as our personalities and the work that we do, we are focused on squeezing value at a time and trying to figure out how to improve processes and all those other pieces for people and ourselves, right? That's just our personality types, I think. And it did bring up a lot of, I thought of that all week. Like every time something came up this week, I'd be like, oh, I feel a little too seen sometimes about this time thing right now, right?
It's huge. It's huge. And we all get stuck. I know I'm in not personally, whether I'm bringing myself to work or personally outside of work, I'm feeling stuck a lot. And the more stuck I feel, the more desperation that shows up. And the more difficulty it takes to actually get present to do what actually needs to be done. And it's tiring. And it's tiring. And so therein lies my revelation that I shared earlier. I'm like, oh, well, I heard you say the word nap. Maybe I should change stillness for nap and close my eyes.
Just take a quick power nap. I've always been envious of people that could take power naps, by the way. I've never been one that's been able to, but I know people that can do that, like take a 10-minute nap in the middle of the day and like feel refreshed. And I've been like, I don't know that technique. I can't figure it out so far.
I've never figured that out either. I have figured out that soldiering, a word that one of my colleagues who has created a methodology called the communication protocol, that like soldiering through something. I've been soldiering for decades. Like it was my go-to strategy. Soldier on, push through, get to the other side. Things will somehow be miraculously better, different, changed.
Mm-hmm.
There's just more soldiering on the other side of soldiering. So like you have to do something to interrupt the pattern. And so really being cognizant of when I'm just being stubborn, and what I really need to do is either stop what I'm doing and do something else, or be still.
Mm-hmm.
And being still is an incredibly hard thing for me. I will be working on that for many lifetimes. I've mentioned before, I really like the book 4,000 Weeks.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like about it is that it says the quiet part out loud, which is some parts of life are boring and some parts of life have to be done over and over and over again. Like getting up, washing your face, brushing your teeth. Like you don't do those once, you do them for a long time, over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. If you try to wish that to be something other than it's not, you will spend your life unhappy about having to do them. Mm-hmm. And that time will always seem wasted.
Yeah.
Sort of like the folks who have decided I don't need sleep because somehow I'm superhuman and my body and brain can do things without sleep that yours can't. No. But you've decided that time is wasteful if it is not resting, if you are not integrating, if you are not giving your body and mind time to repair. And that's like really easy for me to sit here in judgment of and point at and be like, no, you've got it wrong. But if you're begrudging the other things you just have to do as a course of being human, you're kind of doing the same thing. You're saying, I'm resentful of it. I wish it wasn't the case. And if I had that toothbrush and time back, just think of what I could have done.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
It's not a thing as far as I know.
I think that I love that. I think this has been a recent shift for me, right? So I think that I spent a lot of time in my life. I want to know the time word count. We should have done a counter for this conversation, but I spent a lot of time, in my life, like going through this idea, specifically with sleep, because you mentioned it, and that reminded me of like, man, this feels so wasteful, right? Like I feel, I wish I could do more. Like it felt like every night going to bed felt like punishment for a long time for me in life, just because I wanted to do more. I had more ideas and I had more things that I was trying to do. And I think that recently I said that, or like within the past year, I said that to somebody, and they recommended the book Why We Sleep. And I would highly recommend that to anybody that has a weird relationship with sleep in any sense. And it's honestly a lot of the content in there. It's a Harvard professor that put together a bunch of sleep knowledge basically into a book. And I think that nothing in there was something new that I'd never heard before, if that makes sense. It's all the normal stuff of like, you should sleep because it's good for you. Here's why, X, Y, Z, right? Like, but having all of it kind of in one place did kind of shift my perspectives for me personally of like, oh, okay, this is not a waste, right, of time. This is valuable. And I need to do this because it allows me to be better the next day and the day after that. And it does important things for my brain, right? And stuff like that along the way. So highly recommend that for anybody out there thinking about time and being frustrated they have to sleep, because I was for a long time.
That's interesting. I know a guy who took 15-minute power naps every so often throughout the day and actually never had a full restful night's sleep for something like 15 plus years. He did this, and it served him well. And Anne, thanks for stopping by and sharing about sleep too. I love, and she's got an extra special knowledge in the world of sleep too, which is great. I love that you joined our conversation, Anne. Thank you. And one of the things that I think when I think about sleep is people always want to figure out how do we burn the candle at both ends? And my response is, you still have the same amount of candle. Want to go?
That's right.
Is it useful to burn your hand from the bottom? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay, turn it sideways, have two lights? I don't know. You still only have one candle. So how do you make that candle is interesting.
And having conversations about this, because we tend to assume that the people we do business with also define time in the same ways we do. Either what their working hours are, where they're willing to show up. Anne's a sleep psychologist.
Yes,
Anne,
she is.
I'm sorry
That's
for
awesome.
treading on your knowledge base, because all I know is I need sleep
I
and
was
I
gonna
like
say,
it.
Anne probably has better books than Why We Sleep. So if you have any other recommendations, throw those in there.
Totally on that.
So I love that book, but there's probably even better ones.
But like defining how we have personally chosen to approach time.
Yeah.
That, either this segment of the day is for my family and my children, or it's for me personally, which I think is one of the hardest things I've had to learn is that, or I've had clients say to me often, I'm not technically unavailable. Well, you are, because you put time on your calendar to do this thing for either yourself or for a client that, yes, you could move somewhere else, but if it were with another person, you would consider it unavailable. So why wouldn't you treat that segment of your day with the same respect as you would if you were showing up for Quentin or Jess, right? Yeah. So all these stories about how we are of greatest use, how we are of greatest value, what is most meaningful. And then we know, like, Anne has told us there's also a great book called Better Sleep for the Overachiever by her.
I love it. I love that you threw your book in there, Anne. I appreciate that so much.
So go get that one.
Yeah.
Read it, take a nap, get a good night's sleep. But that we have to really be cognizant of what we're bringing to the table about time and time management. Because I think I also said to you guys earlier this week, I had a client who said, I'm not sure I'm thinking about time in the right way. And I was like, I'm not actually sure I can tell you how to think about time in the right, like, I'm not a physicist. And I think that's where we have to go for the real official, this is how one should think about time. But what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
does that mean I'm only thinking about work can only happen between these hours on these days? Is it that it should take me less time to do something or more time to do something, or I'm better and more valuable if it gets
Ooh,
done this
you
way
just
versus
said it.
that? I'm
You
like,
just said it. The first one was your brain. Do I work between these hours? The second one was your gut. Do I need more time? Do I need less time? The third one was the value piece. That comes from your heart. You just brought in the 3 brains of
There
leadership
it
right
is.
here. Look at
There
that.
it is.
yes,
they're
I
all
am
right.
that good.
And they're all right. And it doesn't change that time is a resource. And I believe, Quentin, you have shared that.
Yeah.
It's the
Absolutely.
only finite resource. Only. I'm curious to hear about why it's the only
Oh,
one.
I'm
because I
sorry, I
want to
stepped on your
challenge you.
toes, man. I was just so fascinated by that when you
Sorry,
brought it up
Christy.
earlier.
Fine.
that-
I knew. It's
I'm
we-
foreshadowing.
It's fine.
And I
Totally
didn't
fine.
read
No.
ahead. So
No, I think that I mean, obviously we established that. I think that that's right? Like every day, like Christy was saying, we have all these things that we view in our day-to-day as business owners and operators. And I want to say, like, the 3 of us here on this call, we help a lot of other businesses operate, but we're operating our own business too. So we're facing these same challenges and these same kind of tasks each day of how do we balance all this? And I'm guilty of it too, right? Every day, like, oh, do I have enough for this, or can I find enough of this resource? But time's the one that we all have and that we're all equal, kind of standing on an equal footing of. We all live in a 24-hour day, and so how are we using that, and how are we interacting with it in relation to our task ahead, right? And so I'm going to bring up one of the concepts that has been stuck in my brain recently about that. I've been taking Aikido for the past year about at this point. I'm not somebody who would have ever considered myself a martial artist, but a good friend started teaching it, and I said, you know what, I'm going to show up. And one of the things I've enjoyed about that art is its relation. The things you learn in that physical art kind of apply to your business life and apply to your personal life. And one of those concepts that we talk about in that class is ma'ai, which is, and I'm not a Japanese speaker, so sorry if I butcher any of this, but effectively the concept of space or of timing and distance. And the idea in martial arts is if you have enough timing and distance, if you know the timing and you have the distance from something that's coming towards you, that you can deal with anything, right? You can handle anything, you can navigate through it. And I think that that's true of life as well, right? To talk about how it applies to our life, of this concept of, as we are each living in our own perceptions of time, looking out ahead at the things that are coming down the channel at us as business owners, as operators, as, growth focused people. How do we react, or how do we prepare to react at the right time? And how do we pay attention to kind of those surroundings? And so I think there's a real interesting relationship between time and kind of our productivity and our reaction time and everything else that we're doing, both in our personal and in our professional lives.
that's about space too, right? So like if somebody's throwing a punch at me and they're really close to me, I have less time to react.
That's right. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's more like, and again, no disrespect to any practitioners, but if it's more like the Matrix and we're on opposite sides of the room before we start running at each other in like quantum speed, I have theoretically more time. And so if I can actually increase my awareness, that's my greatest tool then, right? Is because it's all still coming at me, but if the faster I can become aware, and then the more practice I am in evaluating what's coming at me, if I practice that muscle on a regular basis, if I'm in the habit of actually asking myself, what's going on? What do I actually need to pay attention to? What's a distraction?
Totally.
Then I can increase my time. And that's how I think of it.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And I think that one of the things that I had thought of earlier that I want to touch on there that you really led up to perfectly, which is this idea that, like, when we are working with, when I start working with a new business owner, sometimes if they feel like they don't have enough time, I'll have them do kind of a study of their time, right? How are they spending it? Where are they spending it? And, and I do that 24 hours a day. I say, record your sleep, record your family time. I want to just get the full picture, right, of kind of how your day is playing out so we can start to talk about it. And I think that I think that's a super valuable exercise, but I think people also sometimes get too caught up in the measurement of it. And actually Jess was saying something a little bit earlier about this, of this idea of like too much optimization or too much retooling or too much trying to focus on that. And you're not actually going to gain any benefit, right? Because you're now spending all of your time recording. If you spend all of your time preparing, then you spend no time acting, right? Like, and there's this fine balance point, I think, between those.
Yeah. How do you push people to? No, I'm not going to go down that path. Okay, let's go. Well,
that's one of the things you've often hit on is because you have a very conscious relationship with time. You use your present retreats on a weekly basis to actually carve out a period of time to be present to yourself and your business, right? And my understanding is that time is about, in part, prioritizing, that you can't do everything. So one of the ways I can make more time is by deciding on a finite number of things to really focus on.
Yes.
And then I think about that. That's one way I can make more time. The other way I can make more time is to deploy money so that other people can do things that would take me time to do. So like, I can't outsource my sleeping, which Anne and is on board with affirming I need, and I'm going to do. And I feel really good about that. I've got Anne telling me.
We have experts telling us.
I've got experts. So, I'm on the right path. I really do like to do things properly. But I remember seeing something on one of the Instagrams or something where they were like, Beyonce's day is actually longer than your day, right? And that she actually doesn't have more than 24 hours. But if she doesn't have to prepare a meal or do any laundry or pick up kids from activities, if she doesn't actually have to manage people directly because she's got people who can do that, if her schedule is being managed by somebody else and she doesn't have to worry about changing times and rearranging schedules, and if something goes kaflooey, she can delegate the fixing of the kafloo to somebody else. I
was wondering if you were going to do that. You did it.
I did it. I did it. Then technically she has a different way to use her time. She doesn't have more of it any more than prioritizing gives me more of it. It just allows me to focus more specifically on certain things that I really have made important in my life. She can write 4 albums if there's other things she doesn't have to do. So can I deploy more money to change the way I interact with the time I have? Not all of us can.
No. Another thing would be why would I do that? Or why are we doing this? And the reason I say that is because I'm going to speak for Christy and I'm going to speak for Q along with myself, and they can challenge me if they like. And that is, well, shoot, now I have to remember it. I did this little, I got it. So we're talking about, time. And you were just talking, if we are doing it because somebody else said this is the way to do it, so we're doing it and we've decided to do it ourselves or spend money or have somebody else's time be involved with it, that doesn't make it right.
No.
And that's why a present retreat is awesome.
And I actually don't know that Beyonce doesn't pick up her kids or make the meals or whatever.
Oh, I know, we're totally right. I was thinking once we got back to all the real people, the non-Beyoncés of the world. I shouldn't say real. She's very real and very amazing.
She's very real, very amazing, and may very well choose to do those things because they are important to her and the relationship she has with the people she does those things with.
That's right.
Right. Simply because she has much more money to deploy on her behalf doesn't mean that she's going to prioritize totally different things than we can do.
Right.
But I'm just thinking about is this finite resource and all these stories we tell ourselves. And then with this idea of time and space and awareness, what are the tools we have at our disposal to create more spaciousness?
Yeah.
And still do the things of being human and alive.
Well, I think that
you have to choose.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that how do we, what tools do we use and how do we, kind of leverage, start to look for ways to do that, all ties into the fact that, we've talked a lot here about everyone has a different definition of like, did they feel productive or not? What's their relationship with time, right? Like we've all had those days where we've had one meeting and we were like, today was a great day. And then we've had days where we've had 8 meetings and we've been like, wow, did I get anything done today? Which is a really interesting kind of, teeter-totter of like, what is productivity? And I think it shifts with everyone. And so I think, and it shifts with each individual over time as well, like what your definition of time and relationship is. But I think tying all of that together too, one of the tools that I would say to use is oftentimes just making sure you have alignment with those around you as well, right? So I think that everybody has a different definition of time. And Christy, I know you and I have seen firsthand with some of our clients, this idea that like one party views something as urgent and the other party views something as urgent as well, but the definition and how they use that word are different, right? So
Totally.
One of them is like, I have to finish this today. And the other one's like, I'll get to this week, right? And so I think that as we ourselves spend so much time in our brains, because we all do, thinking about time and productivity and are we doing it right? Don't forget to kind of reach out to those around you and make sure that you're kind of level setting those expectations and looking for misalignments, right? Because if I'll use a personal example for this, right? So for years, I thought there was an expectation of me to respond to emails within 24 hours, right? Like, and I had set that clock for some reason in my head, and I spent, when somebody emailed me, I would get them something within 24 hours. And I went on, this was probably 4 years ago now, I went on a retreat for a week where I wouldn't have access to email at all, which was the first time in probably 10 years that I didn't have access to email at all, not even, like once a day. And so I spent a week, zero access to email. And I came back and I realized that the world hadn't fallen apart, which is, which is, I guess, what I had been telling myself pressuring myself, stressing myself to get those 24-hour responses. And I realized that if something's actually that important, someone will call me, they'll text me, they'll raise the alert level, right? And so I shifted my own relationship with understanding kind of the definition of our communication tools and time, right? What do those mean and how are we applying them? Now I do reply to my emails if anybody sends me an email, but sometimes it takes me longer than 24 hours now, right? And I think that it's valuable for all of us to take that time to do an assessment and see like, hey, am I being unreasonable to myself and my definition of what time is expected or what people are expecting of my time?
That's brilliant, especially, and I'm going to add to that. One of the things that I did not know I did in business, and it has actually contributed so much to my success, and it actually has helped me help people without even knowing I've helped them, but they weren't necessarily the right client for me to be in service of, or for Red Direction to help and be there in some way. And that's the law of reciprocity. There are so many conversations I will take time to have without an expectation of result. And that is me being of service in a way, but also, yes, I would like to help you. I want to put good out in the world. And if that's all it was supposed to be, there will be a boomerang effect back. And that would be true for what I have seen in Red Direction since 2004 when we began, is that by being open to putting good out in the world, I've also somehow, probably subconsciously and begrudgingly, have been receiving it as well. And to your point, Q, of what was the expectation? Give without receipt? Well, that's out of alignment. Who knew? Who knew? But at the same point in time, it was happening and I was refusing to acknowledge it because it didn't fit into something that was associated with documented, trackable productivity. And in fact, it makes everything that we document and track much deeper and richer, and we're making better decisions because of it over time.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's there's like a period of unlearning with that, right? Like you have to, because I think that a lot of us kind of built those identities of how we deal with that or how we treat that as we were growing up and going through school and everything else. And so reassessing and relearning those kind of those definitions along the way is a critical, I think, thing that we should all do. And you got to continue doing it too, right? Like over and over. You got to continue to go back to the drawing board and be like, wait, is this assumption still correct? Is this assumption still serving me? Or is this hurting me in some way?
And Jess, when you put this topic out there for us, the subtitle is Unleashing Creativity and Innovation. And I don't think I've ever met anyone with any level of creativity, however you define that. And I think that's a very broad definition. My creativity shows up in the work I do with my clients every day.
Yeah.
That is my primary way of being creative and resourceful. It's the thing I pray about, right? Like let me show up with creativity, enthusiasm, and compassion so that we can do good work together, right? So I've never met anybody who doesn't need space in order to show up with that resource, right? And for themselves or for others. And so whether you identify as being creative or innovative or not, if you aspire to be, if what you want is for your business to feel more creative or innovative, there's probably a few things you need to be doing less of in order to create the space for that. Because to Quentin's earlier point, if I'm always firefighting because there's no time and space between me and whatever's blowing up, then all I can do is raise my hands in self-defense and keep my head down. And react, not respond, react. And if I can get a little bit more space and I can decide that there are actually some things I have to choose not to do, which is one of the hardest things for any human being to do, is to actually say, I can't do it all at the same time. Then that's where I see the creativity and innovation coming in, right? There's not a special, if somebody read that and said, she's going to tell us like how to use this increment of time, a methodology by which if we approach an hour's time in this way, we will be more creative.
Yeah, don't do anything.
I mean,
I'll tell you right now.
Maybe I say that, but it's not the first 5 minutes to do this and the next 8 minutes to do this. And then in the next 15 minutes, it's probably exactly that. Like, stop doing.
Yeah, just stop. We did that in 3 seconds. But so you make a really good point about prioritizing, and whether you love him or hate him, he's former IBM guy. Who was that? Jack Welch. Is that right? Jack Welch. He did something that I thought was impeccable and important, and it's hard, and it feels, if you're heart-led, it feels heartless. If you're gut-led, it feels like, why are you making me do this? It's against everything I have. And if you're brain-led, you're just totally, give me more, right? And that is because everything goes in a quadrant. And he did it with people ruthlessly. He also did it with projects ruthlessly. And that's a word I love, ruthless. But the point is that bottom quartile was just gone. To Q's point of, at your point, you got to let some stuff go. And to Q, I can't remember what you said, but there was something that you said that made me think of this whole thing too, as I was listening to Christy. Hold on, let me look at my notes.
I'm sure it was great, but I don't remember what it was. No.
Well, we have to have some parameters with which to take action. There we go. That, right. You did say that. And so I really think that it's too hard for a lot of people to do. And so one of the things that I have added to that I work through, because I'm like, if you can do this, this will be the quickest and the easiest. And it might be heart-wrenching at first. It might be gut-wrenching at first. But in the end, everything will... you set a level of expectation, and everybody knows where that line is, and everybody can work up to that line. And that's great because we have a place with which that's our bar. This is the way we work here, and it does not move. And that is a thing every business needs. This is the way we work here. That does not move. How we use time around it is then part of the secret sauce of how we are working in our business. And so I've added to that a piece of, gotcha, this is the bottom quartile of whatever. Now we've got to look at it in relationship to two other things: the priority list we have today and the interest and energy with which we have to give it across our organization, and see what part of the bottom quartile can actually go. Because everything has a season, and just because it's on the shelf and just because it's not performing to some standard now does not mean it is unvaluable in the future. Yeah. And so if we have people who are willing to put energy into it and they're interested in it, great. It probably is in the wrong place on our priority list. If it really doesn't align to the goals that we have set, how come? Where is that misalignment happening? Where is alignment? That was the one. I knew it'd come back to me. Alignment. That was the one. Yeah. And so are we willing to look at something that theoretically everybody goes, ooh, it should be black and white. It's just always so hard to do. So I'm not whatever about that story we might be telling, and actually be like, well, we have this amount of time. We've set this deadline, or we've set this time frame. What interest do we have? If there's no interest, why is it even on the radar?
Yeah, honestly, I think that reminds me of the some of the stuff that I think we've talked about before, even of like the what's hanging out on your to-do list at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Like, and what keeps getting carried over to the next day. You're not making, you're not finding the time to do that thing. It's either not important and it needs to be just, removed from the list and move on, or how do you, to some of Christy's points earlier, how do you find other resources to leverage to get more of that stuff done, right?
Yeah. Okay, here's where we're at. We're at this place where we have talked about the scripts and the stories we tell ourselves. We have talked about time is the only finite resource. It is the one thing we all have the same amount of, regardless who, what, when, where, and why. And you're listening to the It's Your Business program, brought to you by Red Directions, Bold Business Podcast. And I'm Jess, business consultant who works strategically and helps businesses look 5 steps ahead and make the right choices right now. And we have Christy.
Purpose First Advisors, growth advisory and exit planning.
And we have Quentin.
QCO Consulting, growth strategy and exit planning as well.
And we're talking about time. Time is a catalyst. And those first 2 things are really important setup to what we've sort of transitioned to. And we're going to jump in. I'm going to wear my floaties. Not sure about you two.
We're here for you. We will buoy you.
Yes, that's great. Which is, time is our constraint. And when we embrace it as one, we unlock so much more. We can actually become more time efficient, regardless of doing nothing, packing it all in, whatever toots our own horns, really. Because I have to, because we all have that. We all have the thing that gets us excited, and we all have these expectations of time, and we all judge ourselves around those around us, and we don't have to. We can know it's finite. We can know that it is a constraint. So how can we show up to it and kick butt and get to where we want to go? And we can only do that if we've had the conversation so far about what are the stories that we're telling ourselves? What is that cost of switching? And then talking about that, the fact that we have 24 hours in a day, and we're talking about time, space, and awareness. So let's put time, space, and awareness inside of a container of, okay, how come, and this is my question to you two, how come we actually don't use time in our decision-making process as a constraint? I have no answer, which is why I'm asking you.
I mean, I think, well, I'm going to counter that with saying that, like, I try to. How about that? I don't always.
Okay.
But I think I do look at that, right? And one of the benefits that I think I have been allowed to have over the years, right, is the fact that I've always worked with a bunch of different organizations at once, right? Meaning, so, and I love that. And I think it's good for the people I work with because it gives me, a diverse background, new experiences all the time, right? That I apply to all of those different clients. And I think that as somebody that has, spent most of my career doing so, you have to factor time into everything, right? I have to be very mindful and conscious of every decision I make and how much time I think it's going to take and how much of other people's time it's going to take and like how am I going to manage that. I think that so I think I try to factor in. I don't always, and when I don't, that's when I run into issues, right? When I'm like, oh yes, I can do that. I say yes too much, and I don't set the proper expectations of those people around me. You know.
And I'm married to a project manager, and a lot of the work I do with clients is about sequencing activities. You know, who's going to do it? When is it going to get done? With what resources? You know, how are we going to? So I feel like time is taken into consideration. However, there is often this feeling of, well, we can't possibly know exactly how that's going to unfold. And two extremes happen. Either we try to super control it, like we try to micromanage time to fit within our constraints. Like I have a construction company I work with. Their contracts are both money and time bound. And we all know that the best laid plan never survives its contact with reality. But that doesn't mean it can go on 3 years longer than it was budgeted for, or $4 million more than it was budgeted for. There is some constraint to it. But there has to be a flexibility to deal with the unexpected, the expected but unknown, right? Like I feel like if we could all come to terms with the fact that there is always going to be something unexpected because we can't possibly know the future. And so unexpected is expected. It's we don't know what it is, right? It's an expected unknown, for lack of a better way to think of it, right? What we don't usually do is budget in time for the expected unknown. We build things on these, if it's executed perfectly, without any flaws, this is what it will look like. And then we create a lot of anxiety and stress over the fact that it can't be done that way because nothing goes perfectly, right? So we don't build in contingency on a regular basis. Certainly not enough based on the experience we've had. You know, like our experience should say, you know what, you want it in 10 weeks. My experience is going to take 16 weeks. Well, I'll put 14 in the plan. How did that magically become doable? It didn't. And it just made you feel good for me to tell you I could do it on that time frame.
Isn't that interesting? And so, so I can articulate better some of the things I've been feeling listening to the two of you, which really comes down to the longer the term, the less likely a time constraint end is useful. It's only between milestones where time constraints become useful to be able to make course corrections and prioritization and changes along the way to hit that larger goal of where do we want to be at a certain time, place, piece. And so I find that interesting because, you know, when I go into companies and we're doing annual planning, they have the way that they do their growth, or they have the way that they do this, or they have we did this last year, so this is what's going to happen this year. And it's amazing how many people think everything that has happened in the past is actually the repetition that's going to occur in the future. I have yet to be in a company, grow a company, sell a company, participate in any part of the acquisition process where they're repeatable events.
Yeah,
even having done it more than once.
Yeah. Amen. We can map out like Quentin and I have done this recently, right? Here's the things that have to happen. Here's, if you really want to do it in this time frame, how fast they would have to move. Are you committed to moving that fast while doing all these other things?
Yeah.
Or are you willing to put more into more time into the schedule to do them at a different pace? Right. So your question's really intriguing. Like, do we not take time into consideration? And I think sometimes
as a catalyst, specifically.
At a catalyst, our culture says it has to get done, therefore we will find the time. Right?
Yeah.
And there is no consideration of, well, then what sleep do you miss? What kids thing do you not go to? What meal do you skip? What something has to give. right? But we do have a cultural expectation. And I believe we build companies with the expectation of it has to happen, therefore we will find the time. So especially when we have teams that are really stretched and they're high performing teams, people give them a lot more to do because they get it done, right?
Yeah.
And they're constantly making trade-offs. They're constantly weighing opportunity costs. And something is suffering in order for them to make the impossible possible, but they keep doing it. Therefore, they keep being asked to do it.
It's interesting. Opportunity.
Right? They don't actually say, for lots of reasons, including just being the fear of being fired, right? And needing a job. And that's a real thing, right?
Yep.
But we will also all sit in a room together and go, it is not actually feasible for you to do all of these things. Do we all agree that is not feasible? Yes, but it has to be done. So I guess we'll have to figure it out. Like, that's insanity. That is like, may not be the official definition, but it is one definition of insanity.
Yeah. I think that, like, one of the things earlier, I almost said find the time. And then I love that you focus in on it, because I think that I stopped myself because the more time I spend with it, to try to run up our time forward counter for this show, the more, the more I realize, like, that I really don't like that phrase, right? It is a part of our kind of our vocabulary, is like, oh, I'll find the time. But I think that's something we should all, like, work to stop using that phrase, because you can't. It's not real, right? I think we're all telling ourselves.
I think you make the time. You make a choice about how to use your time.
But I think you don't get to make up more of it, right? You get to choose how you're applying the time that you have.
I think you can slow it down. I'll be real. Ever since I started doing my present retreat, I get better and better at saying no throughout the week, or going, cool, that's something I've got to think about. You'll hear from me after next week. Or, now isn't the right time. That may be interesting. Let's continue that conversation. I am which means I'm really good at that. Thanks, no thanks. Really good at that. I'm not as good as I could be, but I'm way better than I was even this time last year. Every year I'm exponentially better. And so that's actually a way that time slows down, because if I can get that decision making and the cost switching and the opportunity, the diminished return of course I'll find the time, that is we've been talking about, I actually am like, sure, 20% of my work week is dedicated to working on my business. But look how quickly I can evaluate something and go, now, later, never.
Yeah.
Everybody benefits from that. And I use that in my outside of work too. Every project I do. So if somebody is asking me, well, how quickly can you get that done? I'm like, we don't belong to work. We're not going to work together, because I have a couple of questions you haven't been able to answer to me first, so that I can actually give you an idea of that. And I think that that's important. I think it's important to be able to, accountability shows up here. I'm like, thanks for asking me. How come it took you so long to give me a call? Oh, yeah. And no offense, everybody out there watching, I'm coming across a little, I might be a little, edgy, and that's okay. Just know you're thinking of that happens to you for other things. And so I'll step back a minute and I'll say, these are the things that are important. If you haven't been able to do it on your own and you've tried and tried, it's probably a smart thing when you're in your initial conversations and just starting work with anybody in your company, a new team you're trying to create that's high performance, an outside consultant, that they don't have any magic knowledge. There is zero magic knowledge when it comes about time. So when you hear somebody like me, and I'll only speak for myself here, start questioning you about it, it can get real, and it can get touchy, and it can get, because we don't take the time to acknowledge the way we use it already. We don't take the time to acknowledge the assumptions around it. And until we do those two things, goals are just words that we say and maybe are written down too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that my biggest, the biggest thing I'm pulling from this, right, or that I keep hearing over and over as the underlying kind of theme is that like we're all going to continue to fight our own battles with time and how we view it, and that is rinse and repeat cycle. You know, we're going to go back to the drawing board over and over. And I think that's what we should do, right? As humans that are trying to figure out our path forward. But more importantly, possibly than all of that, is looking at your definition of time and how it relates to those around you, how it relates to the expectations that you're putting on yourself, that other people are putting on you. And then hopefully just using that to have real conversations with your team and with your colleagues and everyone, with your family, you know, everybody around you, so that you can kind of reset those expectations and get closer to agreement, at least, over and over.
Yeah. And Anne points out in the chat that, you know, sleep is one of the first things to go because we feel like it's fungible.
Yeah.
And we don't take into account the consequences of short shrifting that. But I think about, like, when my dad passed away, there were hundreds of people who came out to tell us what a great guy he is. And he was a small business owner. And he would tell, and people in line said, your dad did the flowers for my wedding. Your dad did the flowers for our graduation. You guys have taken care of all of our folks. And, you know, he had made a really big impact. And one of the thoughts I had was, okay, and so I'm really glad you experienced my dad in that way. But if he was taking care of you, he wasn't able to take care of something else. And not that my father neglected me, but there, like, literally had to be a choice. If he's doing your flowers for Christmas, that means that we are not celebrating Christmas until your needs are taken care of, right? And that's just the nature of the business he was in. So what I want to do is, like, question, when you see somebody, you're like, wow, that person shows up for everything. They're the person who will take the shirt off their back. You can count on them when the chips are down. Whenever you call, they drop everything and come over. Somebody's been dropped. Something else has been dropped in order for them to be that person that you perceive them to be, right? So there's always a cost, even of being the good guy. There's always a cost. And I think we have to decide whether or not sometimes we want to, you know, if we're feeling like, oh, somebody will be disappointed in me because I didn't drop everything and show up for them, or rearrange my schedule to make it feasible for them, or spit wooden nickels for them. Think about who you might be asking them to drop in that sequence, because something, you know, however you're perceiving them, they've had to make either consciously or unconsciously choices about where they show up and how they show up. And I think about that often, just because I think we perceive the good guy, the guy who shows up, and usually a guy, sorry. But the, you know, sort of what makes somebody reliable and dependable, never complains, always gets it done, always seems to find a way. At what cost? Anne's tapping out because she needs a nap. No, she's going for a run. Which is probably also something we should prioritize in our days. But there's a lot that goes into being available for people. And I think that if we can also create workplaces, if we can build companies where people feel comfortable saying to us, in order for me to get that done, I need you to get this done. Or it's not actually feasible for me to get both these things done at the same time.
Yeah.
But we really don't say that often. We usually find some superhuman way to make something work. And then we're really resentful of being asked to do it again. But that happens all day, every day. In most businesses.
Self-accountability. So we've talked about a lot. We've talked about stories. We've talked about awareness.
Deep, man.
It is. We've talked about what the fact that it is a resource. We've talked a little bit about a catalyst, and the catalyst actually comes down into cost. It comes down into the choices we're making. It comes down into repeatability. And it comes down to the fact that we're each going to have our own struggle, and there is zero magic outcome. There is only the way we can do, which is, I think, managing time in the short term is way better than trying to manage time in the long term, because the farther out you go, the more likely there is for change. And that brings us to the part of the show where we want to talk about, what was your biggest takeaway? What was the biggest takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can go because I feel like I kind of gave mine away early, right? I feel like the two things, well, two things, I can add one to it, right? I think I'm gonna stop using that word find the time, right? Like stop using that phrase, I should say, find the time. I think that it's part of this like over productivity culture, right? And I didn't, that I'm being brought to, in front of my face as we talk about all of this. And I think that, the other thing again is how are we, thinking about our time and how does that compare to the scale that others have, and whether those people, your view of time and your scale of time and how productive you can be, or how much time you can spend on various activities, how does that compare to the scale your family is using? How does that compare to the scale your boss is using, or your employees are using, right? So as we talked earlier about managing people and driving for outcomes and those sort of things, really try to, if you can't for some reason have the conversation, which you should try that first, but if you can't, then at least try to put yourself in someone else's shoes and think about how time is viewed by them and how their day is impacted. Because I think that, funny enough, you can probably get the most out of your time by thinking about how other people are viewing their time.
For me, that's great. And for me, it's something we actually didn't talk that much about. So all of us work with clients to help them grow. Every client we've probably ever met wants to grow faster. Like they want short time frames, faster results. I wish it could go faster than it is something I think we've all heard a lot of. We also have all either been part of an exit on the buy or sell side or assisted people on the buy sell side. And oftentimes exit planning, succession planning, and exit planning are seen as these very far in the future events that I don't have to think about right now. And then magically at the end, things will align and I will be able to get the outcome I want. But I'm not going to think about it right now. And I think both those things factor into time when we're all the things we've talked about with regard to time. I think what I would take away is not just how does this affect how I run my business on a day-to-day, how do I manage my time and what I do and what I don't do and how I prioritize and how I coach my team, but also in the life cycle of my business. Does attaining growth in 12 to 18 months actually benefit me? If it was a 3 to 5 year trajectory, could I actually get what I really want out of it in a way that doesn't run everybody into the ground and make me feel really stressed and behind and somehow like I'm failing? And if I actually plan how I grow with the end in mind, if I am actually thinking about this future that I can't really know, but I know a few things, I probably don't want to work forever. I'm not going to not need money in the future. And eventually I'm not going to be here to run it. So if I want it to keep going, it's probably going to go without me. If I could get the time and space that Q talked about to not only deal with what's happening today, but to look a little further ahead, how would that change my relationship to my business and what I perceive as a lack of time and being under the time crunch and feeling pressured by that and feeling stressed and feeling overwhelmed? So maybe that's something we explore, just how we actually view time over the life cycle of our business. It's so tempting to talk about how do we manage time in days, weeks, months, as opposed to years and decades.
Yeah. And that's my biggest takeaway was there are no easy answers here. There's no easy answer. And it's comforting and it's scarier than I can ever imagine, all at the same time, just from my own self standing here. And then also, for the way that I'm showing up for the clients of Red Direction. Oh yeah, there's some, I can bring a lot of compassion to that because we all feel it. And that's something that's huge. It's something that's interesting. It's something that is challenging. And that's where managing time, getting tasks done, getting to the next. So the next step is, the right next step. There are tons of tools for that. We didn't talk about that, I think, on purpose today. I think we're talking more about what is that larger cycle. I think we're talking more about the fact that your choices matter. When you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Do you really know what you're saying no to? When you say yes to something, there is a consequence, positive, neutral, or negative, that will trickle out and ripple through. And how far, how wide, and how deep those are actually really matters. And when we know what is important to us, and we know that we can go, cool, time is here. Because I know what's important to me, I can use this to my advantage. That's really my biggest takeaway. But when we don't know, or we're second guessing ourselves, or we're running scripts, or we're watching what other people are doing and wishing we had the same success they did, or everything we're trying to make repeatable can't be repeatable, or the list goes on. What's important to me? Where am I going? How solid am I in it? Can I get more solid in it so that with confidence I can make a choice? Because that choice will determine what your next set of options are and how you use the time. You can always backtrack. There's very few things in this world you actually can't backtrack. All it takes is more time. But sometimes it takes the decision to get rid of some options so that we can actually use the next set of time to actually either make up ground, leap, or, cross chasms that we didn't even know existed. But here we go. All right.
I love it.
This
Look
is
at all. What a great time.
It's your business.
Is it 5 o'clock somewhere?
That's what I was going to say.
Yes.
Guess what's next? You are watching us on LinkedIn Live. You are watching us on YouTube Live, and you will see this in the Bold Business Podcast feed. Their podcast feed. In addition to seeing it on all of our websites or profiles out there, ask your questions, share this conversation, because until we're talking about it and all the elements are normalized, it's still going to be elusive. Until next time.